thank you so much for being here today and taking time out of your schedule to come and share your story with us and talk to us about what your journey has looked like. I'm super excited to talk about it because I really, really value and admire like tremendously people who face adversity headlong and just dive right in. And there's this great book, maybe you've heard of it. It's called The Art of War.
Mhm.
Or no, I got it backwards. It's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And the
Okay.
whole book is about resistance and how we're going to face resistance in our life. And the faster we learn how to lean into that resistance, the faster we're going to get through it because you can't go over it under, all that stuff.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
when I first heard your story, it like that just was screaming at me like, man, this is a guy that has really just got such a big heart and such a big passion for life. And so rather than me try to tell people who you are, what your story is, I was wondering if we could just start there with you kind of give us the short or long, whatever comes to your heart about where you're at
Okay.
and what you're going through and how things are progressing for you. And then we'll just kind of start unpacking it from
Yeah,
there.
I think it's often funny. I was laughing with Shara, my wife, this past weekend because we had somebody come up to me and they started their conversation by asking me, are you a biker? And I just thought it was the humorous story. So as we kind of like started to get to know each other and started to introduce each other, I think it was funny to watch this family just sit there and look at me and go, because they're like, well, how did you get to Colorado Springs? How long have you been here? And I said, I've been here almost 12 years. And, and it's like, to get here. And I was like, well, I came here as a vice president of a company, and they were just like dumbfounded. It was like one of those things where you just don't fit, you just don't fit the actual mindset of what somebody is. So it's always funny. Our identity is tied up in so much of what we do. But it shouldn't be, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's like I
And
am who I am, no matter if I was a biker or a
yeah,
corporate
labels are so
executive.
crazy, right? And for those of you who aren't watching this and you're listening, I mean, you got this, two and a, I mean, what you got this huge facial hair, this super long beard. You always got a hat on. You're not a small man. You
No.
know, I could see where someone would look at you and go, "That dude is fresh off of, you know,
Yeah,
the Harley
yeah.
event."
Exactly. Yeah, it was fun. It's funny, but I think it's a great way to kind of start because you know, starting back, I think when I was in high school and college, I kind of was in, like, I think a mode everybody probably goes in during their 20s, which is just how do what am I going to do with my life? What do I want to be? Kind of all those things. And I remember sitting in Mankato State University, and all my buddies were going home for Christmas, and my parents and I weren't talking, and so I was home. I was working two different jobs, working for myself. So I was going to stay at Mankato, and I just remember them all dropping off bottles of booze. And I just remember sitting there during Christmas break as they're all going home to their families, and I'm by myself, and just thinking, like whenever all my friends got together and thought, what should we buy Pete? It was this, it was just nothing but booze, and it just hit me as I was by myself, just reflecting on, you know, wow, I'm 2 years, from graduating from my undergraduate, and this is my identity, right? This
Yeah.
is who I am to everyone. I'm the party guy, and so it really made me. That was a turning point in my life where I said, okay, and I kind of turned towards faith. But really, kind of almost, I went to a Bible college, a transfer from Mankato State to a Bible college. But for me, it was like a halfway house. I wasn't
Mm.
there to get a biblical education. I really wasn't there to pursue, anything that was going to be in the Christian space. I was just thinking like, well, I got a problem, and this is my identity. And so if I have to pay my way through school and I could get kicked out for drinking, maybe this is the greatest motivation is, like if I'm putting all the money's on me, it's not on my parents. So if I get booted, then
Yeah.
I'm out. And so I just kind of used it in the halfway house. And I think, that's the place where I discovered my first, mentor that's still a mentor in my life. Today, his name is Mike Heiser. And Mike really kind of came into my life, and he was young. He was only maybe six years older than me, and was in his first undergraduate professorship. And he was also attending. He was working on his PhD at the University of Wisconsin. So we didn't just go to school together, but I also worked part-time. So I used to sit at Truth Hardware and hang window parts that were going to get painted, the window cranks around everything. And I'd sit across from him and ask this professor all these questions about God, about theology, but then I think also just life in general. And I 8 hours, back and forth, sitting that kind of built this really strong friendship that spanned, decades. But it was a really instrumental time in my life, because I think I knew one thing: whatever I was going to do, I was going to know why I believe what I believe. I didn't know what I wanted to believe. I was ready to push everything I had believed aside into the corner of my brain and just say, okay, let's start over. And if this thing, is real, then let's just completely dig in and
I love the
study.
idea of understanding why I believe what I believe. It's such an important facet to, I think, like people's core values and kind of understanding how people function, because I think so many people live their lives by default and not by design. They don't understand, and I think that's where we're starting to get this, and we're kind of, this polarizing political and social dynamic, is because people just dig in because they don't know how to defend. Like, my mind has changed so much over the last 5 years on all kinds of topics, because I go, well, I don't know why I think that. Let me like wrestle that to the ground a little bit, and you tell me why you think you think. And like probably half the time I'm like, oh, I need to change up what I'm thinking, because this guy's got a point, So I love that you were exposed to that and kind of had the foresight or the wisdom really to go, let me find out why, and really drill into that.
Well, it was so humbling, because I think many of us, we kind of are force fed something, like we have a heritage or we have influence, and sometimes that's family, sometimes that's somebody that was, I think for a lot of us, it was a combination of maybe something that happened in the home, but a lot of times who we hung out with in high school. I mean, what they thought, and their position. And I think it's just one of those things that I felt kind of force fed a certain way to think about the world, to see the world, the worldview, about everything. And yet I had no idea why I believed what I believed. I was parroting, everything that I had heard before. And then it's humbling when you hit that moment where you're trying to say, okay, it's kind of like show your work. I think Heiser was great with me, because like my whole life, I could sum it up with him being my mentor, was, okay, approach the board, show me your math, show your work. And then I was like, oh, I don't have anything to back that up. Like, I don't have that. I remember we were in one discussion, and it was the first time I've been really humble, but he, really, really big time. But he goes, have you read? And he just gave me a list of books in this email. It was back when there were email groups and Yahoo. And so we were having this big discussion, and there was a lot of scholars and people in the group, and I'm this little peon undergraduate student. And but he goes, have you read these books? And I'm like, nope, not one. And he goes, well, why don't you go ahead and read those? And then I would say, these 6 you should read twice. And then
I love that. And then come back to the conversation.
Then come back to the conversation. You might be able to speak about it intelligently. And I was like, oh, and a lot of people when they hear that, are like, oh, that's harsh, but it was like the greatest thing that I could have ever learned, because it just really
Yeah.
taught me, I mean, why do you speak so positive, and feel like you're committed to this when you really haven't done the math? And I think that's something that got me where I was. So I think, I go into a whole new kind of life at that point, where I don't care where I end up. I just want to make sure that I'm convinced and I've done the homework. And I think that that ability to clean your slate is something that's proven good, because you're right. I mean, even, every year you almost have to go in and go, okay, let's just weigh everything. Like, why is that? Why am I so passionate about that thing?
Yeah.
And what's driving that? And I think, it's a good time to reset every year. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I start on a career. I end up turning towards faith-based ministry in the beginning, and I spent 10 years basically because I just felt like I was passionate for people. I think, it began and ended with people. It wasn't, I just really loved to, take care of people, visit people in the hospital, get involved in their lives. I had a lot of opportunities to build relationships and try to break down barriers. And to me, that became, my first 10 years of married life. Cher and I were doing that and investing in others. And it's always a risk, right? You risk a lot when you do that. So,
Always. Yeah.
so it's not like a bowl full of cherries. It's sometimes you risk and it fails, right? And
I had a young man that I was talking with the other day, and he shared with me that he was excited to be making new friends. He's kind of a young adult and he's getting out into the world and he's doing his thing. And he said, but the problem I'm having is that I get excited to have these new friends and I pour into them and I invest in them. And then the more that I learn about them, the less I want to be their friend. And it was striking to me because it's like, it's hard when you pour into people and you invest in people and you're looking for like your people, right? Like they have the same core values, the same level of integrity, the same things. And like I told, I was like, well, my heart breaks to hear that, because gosh, it's just such a not good way to look at things. And that's how people, I think, become cynical and bitter. And it's like, you got to almost have to pull back and go, look, I'm investing and pouring and loving on these people, and they're just at a different place in their journey, right? And doing that from a distance, because I know for me, my wife loves everyone. She shows up, she's got the biggest smile, she lights up a room when she walks in, and like you always know how I feel. Like it's on my face, it's all like I wear my heart on my sleeve. Like if I'm in a bad mood, there's no hide. I'm just like, yep, I don't. And I tell her all the time, I'm like, I don't know how you hang out with those people, because they're crazy. And she's like, yeah, but they're people.
yeah,
And it's such a gift to the people who can do that. So yeah, that's cool. And I love the idea of just being there to serve people, which is what you're doing now with your nonprofit and the things that you're doing, even based on everything that you're experiencing today.
yeah. And I think those first 10 years, you with risk, I got to a place where I just got, burnout, and I wasn't done with people, but I just was like, okay, I've got to go in a different direction. I think, and really settle down. I was always kind of looking at, okay, what's the next biggest impact that I can do? And that's a hard thing to bring. I have 5 daughters. I'm a father, and I had moved a lot as a kid. So I was resilient in moving.
Yeah.
But then I realized how hard it had been on me, and it was hard to watch my daughters kind of grow up, seeing a change of venue every 3 or 4 years. And so for me, it was like, okay, I've got to change and try to pursue something. So then I went into technology and kind of a corporate bent, but my goal was always to build, develop myself as a leader, and then try to invest in people again. But I knew like I'd have to start at the bottom and just start, kind of redo my entire career. So that happened. I moved to Bellingham, Washington and started in a software company. Just start at the bottom, and I remember thinking I have 5 daughters and I'm making $25,000 plus 6% commission. And I was like, oh, this is not, there's only one thing I can do is like work my butt off so that I can't be here very long, and it was just, I think that was a motivation in and of itself. But I think it really started me again on kind of another journey of, I think I started to notice differences in people, if that makes sense. Like there are people that I think are motivated to kind of say like, hey, I want to do an investment. And if it means hard work, if it means extra time, if I got to work on my own time, if I, and then there's kind of the people that go to work and work is work. And then, they, then they flip a switch and they don't have a lot of aspirations. It's kind of like, if I'm going to work, then it's going to be on my terms. And to me, that was just so foreign. Because to me, I was like, I want to learn everything about the company. I want to learn everything about the departments. I want to know the department directors. I want to know what role they play and what we're putting out as an end product. And so it just became this whole, career of kind of learning from the top down. Like I remember asking the CEO, can I give tours and go on tours with you when you give people tours of our company? Because I wanted to hear how he talked about our company. When he was at every department, every little thing, how important was that department in his mind to to what we were doing? And then, because I knew then I could learn how all these pieces fit together. And I could lead well. So then that led me into some leadership arenas, because I could figure out how the whole thing came together.
You kind of see the big picture, and you can you start to learn how to like connect all the dots, and you see how everything. And I think that's super important. I'm curious, have you ever taken Gallup's Strengths Finder? Yeah. So do you remember what your like top 5 strengths are?
I don't. I'd have to go look at them.
I'm a huge fan of it, and I love and just listen to, like, you and I are very similar in that way. Like I want to know how everything works, because I don't think anything lives in a vacuum. Everything has impact, and it's like what I'm doing with this podcast, with raising my kids, with my serving at church, with whatever it is I'm doing, my business, it's impacting people in multiple ways. And I want to know, because I feel like I have a responsibility when I make a decision about something. I want to not necessarily cater to everyone's need, but I want to know like what are the consequences, and try to understand like what are some of the unintended consequences, right? I think that's like the compassionate way to sort of lead teams and understand. And so I'm curious. I would be curious to know where you land in there.
Well, and I think one of the biggest books that influenced me in that time period was Never Eat Alone. And just this idea of like, you have this 30 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour every day. Who could you be with, and what could you glean from them? Right. And if anything, you hone your skills on approaching people and building relationships, and that's a bare minimum. But at the big thing, you start to see kind of where they play in the company. You develop a relationship, you develop an appreciation for what they do. And then, those relationships became the things that helped me become a good executive once I got there, because I was friends with all of those people, and I invested them, and I had a genuine interest in what they did. Like part of what they did made me and my team successful.
And you saw them as people versus employees or departments, right? Like you knew their names, you probably knew their kids, their spouse, all of it.
And it's so hard. And I think the investment part of that was that sometimes happened on my own time. That was sometimes staying late. That was going to the pub on a Friday after work and hanging out with the team, because I want to get to know them. And that's an investment I'm willing to make, because I understand what it means for the big picture. And like I said, there were other people who were with me at that work, and some of them are still at the same role that they were 13, 14, 15 years ago.
Same desk, same parking spot.
Exactly. And you're just, and maybe that's perfect, but for me, the aspiration is just, you want to, like, I want to grow and expand and invest in somebody, because if I'm moving up, then someone's filling my role behind me. And so you're providing opportunity for other people. And so one of the coolest things I ever got to do is start at my own a department that didn't exist. And you kind of start as a department of one and prove that it could be profitable. And then if it was profitable, then I could expand. So it's kind of one of those earn your way up. And it was one of the greatest opportunities that I had, because I'd never done any of it. And really, in our industry, nobody had done it. And so it was just like, it was a wet piece of clay. It was like, let's just try it.
That's awesome.
Go for it. It was one of the, the greatest experiences of my life. That department still exists today. What we do still exists. There's people working in Colorado Springs that work for that department still. Cool. So it's really cool. But I think that led me on this, corporate journey of developing, people. But I think the biggest thing of who I am was always in the back of my mind, like investing in 5 daughters, right? And probably the greatest blessing I've ever had, besides being married to my wife, is my children, and five girls. Because you start to question, like how do I help them not have the same upbringing as me? If I was force-fed things, then how can I teach them? So my goal didn't become, hey, I'm going to teach you what I believe or what I'm for or what I'm against. It became, hey, I want to help you understand what it means to do really strong research and really, really dig into something, so why you believe whatever you're passionate about, in whatever, if it's politics, if it's, your favorite,
so huge, man. Like,
team, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we have 8 kids, and I didn't want kids. I came from a really dysfunctional household. My dad was married 3 times. When I got married to my wife, subconsciously in the back of my head, and probably consciously at least once or twice, I had thought, well, we'll see how many years I can get out of this before I move. It was just like what was modeled for me. So I just expected that that's how it was. And, we ended up having 2 kids, and then we spent about 7 years working on us. We kept the marriage together. We took it to the brink. I mean, we were real close, and I carry a lot of the burden of that, or did. And somewhere around our 4th or 5th kid, my wife was like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, we were having more kids, and it was always kind of that conversation of like, are you gonna go get fixed? Am I gonna get fixed? How do we stop this train from moving? And then it was like, well, I'm pregnant, and we'll talk about that in 9 months. And like, I remember very distinctly, like, with our 5th child, saying to my wife that, like, and it's funny, I get emotional about it. I've learned, and this was with 5, and so now it's even more true. I told her, I said, I have learned so much from each of my kids, and I feel this humongous sense of responsibility to raise them in such a way that they can break the generational paradigms of my family, that we can have as many kids as God gives us, because clearly I have a lot to learn. Like, because he just keeps bringing me, and I've got 6 daughters. I'm with you, man. I get it. Like, you look at that, and for me, like, it is just the underlying current that informs so much of what we do. And you nailed it. It's not so much that because I'm the same as you, man. I do not want to teach my kids what to believe. I want to teach them how to critically think their way into their own belief structure. And, I mean, I'm a Jesus follower. We go to the same church, but my oldest son for years was a very vocal atheist. And he would tell you, like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Jesus. And the only reason we never argued about it was because I would say, well, tell me why. And he would say, this is why, this is where I'm at. And I'm like, okay, I disagree. But the fact that you've thought it through, all I can do is pray for you and hope that you see more as you learn more. And, June or July of this year, he got baptized. Like, he did that journey. He kept being open and critically thinking through it. And he got to a place where, and he and I don't always agree on the theology of it, but we're all explorers, right? And we're humble enough to go, man, what do you think? Because I don't know. Right.
Exactly. And it's just so, I think it's so valuable, because in a world where, we didn't do it right when we were young, and they don't always do it right. But, I think the right, when we talk about right, it's just like so much of what we, I have a small group that's coming up, and I was looking through a question that I actually wrote. I'm like, crap. So I'm like giving it to myself, but it was a question of like, what do you think your kids think about, your belief system or the Bible or anything like that? And I had to, be honest that, like, I don't know, to a certain extent, a lot of them probably take more information from things outside of faith that form their belief on faith than they actually do, the source.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the same time, I look at the fact that they know, they know that when they're going to dig in, when they feel like pursuing it, they kind of know that I'm an open book, I'm a source, and they can come and talk with me. But I think so many times we just, we have those influential peer groups that form up so much of what we believe and what we're passionate about, and everything. And I think that's true now today more than ever, because ideas just flow easier today with social media and with everything.
Yeah. And it's all soundbite technology. Like, it's like the armchair activist or the hashtag activist and the Twitter, and it's like everything's, I've expressed to my kids, because we keep them off social as long as we can, social media platforms as long as we can, because I think that we will discover 10, 15, 20 years from now that people are having a harder and harder time communicating thoughts and ideas effectively, because everything's in 140 characters. It's all memes and, quotes and, small bite things. When, I was having a conversation with somebody on social media today, and I had to back off and say, look, this isn't the right forum, because we're talking about a complex idea, and you're trying to share depth and nuance and all of this in like a tweet, and it's just not possible. Where, you and I go grab a cup of coffee, we're going to find out that we agree on way more than we disagree on. And the nuances of that come with proximity, right? Like, we got to get close to one another. And I love that about what you've learned in your leadership style, is like not eating alone, like having lunch with, getting, spending as much time with other human beings and hearing their story. And that's why I do this podcast. Like, I just invite people on because I'm like, I want to hear your story. I want to know more about, like, and the impact of that is others get to listen. They get to just, be the fly on the wall to hear what's happening and how these people are navigating life. So,
because I think, I spent so much of my time being the cocksure, idealist who was just like, well, like, I can change people's mind just because I speak and they will listen.
Right.
And after a lifelong,
I am the boss.
as a decade of learning that that's not really how it works. And and that you could use even convincing arguments and really use a lot of things, and your ability to motivate or move people or change their mind is very limited. But yet then you'll get in relationship and love somebody and care about them and show how much they care, and all of a sudden they're there, and you're like, like, how come my logic didn't work? And it was
it's gonna do that. You gotta, it's like, I have this saying, like, I'm less interested in being right than I am being understood. And the same goes for like someone else that I maybe don't maybe agree with. I'm less interested in proving you wrong. I just want to understand. So what I find is, a lot of times I'll ask a lot of questions, like, well, tell me more. And like, walk me through what that looks like for you. Or, well, what about this scenario? And I find that they'll tend to get defensive, to like circle back to your original thought. Like, they don't know why they think that. Or when you start to poke holes in it, like, I think they start to feel um either shame or guilt, or like you're pounding on them, and it's like, no, just help me understand where you're at, because that's what I want. I just want to understand. And what I have found in the last couple of years that I've sort of rekindled my faith has been sort of the arrogance in, well, you got to help me understand. It's like, there's so much in this world I'm not gonna ever understand. I need to just love you anyway and accept it. Like, I don't need to understand it. I just need to accept it. Right. And really move beyond that into embracing it. Like, I'm good. We're good. How can I be there for you? And it's really, I think humility is spot on. It's such a hard thing to learn. And I feel like, it's like, if you don't learn it, it'll come to you. It'll come to you
Yeah,
eventually.
yeah, and it really, I think it goes hand in hand with vulnerability. I think, if you can start to break down your walls and be able to see that there are other people's opinions and different things. I think even when you think of like pulling a group of people together, there's so much diversity, and it's such a beautiful thing. Like, you weren't raised the way that I was raised. You come
Yep.
at things, you approach to work. Some people get a job because their best friend got them a job. Some other people started at the floor and worked themselves up. Other people, it came at it. But how that changes our conversation about something that doesn't have anything to do with work or leadership is because one person really values relationships because it played a significant role in where they're at, and another
Yeah.
person might value like a lot of hard work, and one person may feel like they get respect because they earned it, and another person maybe didn't get it because somebody gave it to them. And so that all kind of creeps into the discussion, and that's why it's so beautiful to have such diverse people in any group, in any setting, and even in your family, because it really helps you if you kind of sit back and listen to their perspective. There's always something there to take away from it. You can
Yeah.
always continue to learn. And I think as I started moving through corporate leadership, that was the one thing I think that I if I could say like one strength that I felt was like building teams, because I felt like I had done it wrong many times, and then I watched common things that people do. We all can make a mistake of trying to build a team out of people that are just like us, and
Yep.
then they possess all of our weaknesses, all of our ideas are similar, and it makes us feel really good until we have to come up with something creative to solve the
Yeah.
problem, and then you
Yeah.
realize that we're all thumbs, and we don't do it. And I think being able to kind of look at things like Strength Finder, things like Enneagram, things that you can do were really designed to help you build a diverse team,
Yeah.
to understand that there's value in this person and how they go about it, and they're going to be a strength to your
Yeah.
weakness, and that's how we build towards success. And if you just end up with a bunch of people, I had one department where this guy, we did the Enneagram, and every single person, including himself, tested exactly the same on 3 tests. And you're like you're like and then that was the ding 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 moment of,
Yep.
oh, so you guys are visionaries, but you didn't have anyone in your team who was going to ask the questions like, okay, but like, how do we get there, and how do we build the
Yeah.
roadmap, and what are these
Yeah.
little in the
Where's the
organization?
strategy, guys? Where's your execution, guys? Yeah, it's funny. I go out of my way to interact with people who don't think like me and don't act like me or don't look like me, because I really think, and sometimes it's hard. I mean, we've built teams and you get, people are button heads, but you got to kind of you got to really work. It is harder, right? It's easy to have a bunch of me's,
Yeah.
like, that's great.
Oh,
Love that. Like, who doesn't want that? But so, I mean, it's
yeah.
harder because, like, navigating those relationships and helping people understand that, like, they're filling in gaps where you have, you know weaknesses or areas that you can improve. And it's like, the thing I loved about StrengthsFinder was, the way it was described to me is that, like, it's all focusing on what you're good at and put your energy in that and bring other people into your team that fill in the areas that you're not great at. Like, let them shine, right? Like, let people be what they're meant to be. And it was the first of those like personality type things, that was like not talking about how to fix people. It was solely talking about how to let people be what they're designed to be. And that just really resonated with me. Like, what a great way to like reduce people's insecurity by going, you're amazing here. Just keep crushing that and don't worry about this other stuff, because we're going to find people that can do that for you or with you. Like, and that was just like, that's how a team should be built. Like, that's, that just felt so much more like unifying than some of the other things that I'd looked at. And so, yeah, that's why I bring it. It's a great tool. I love it, man.
And then I think, when you look at vulnerability and everything, I think, for me, my story is like 2019. I'm at a church of about 2,200 people, and we're coming into Christmas, and we're usually 4,000 or 5,000 people are going to be at this thing, and you're trying to go crazy on like all this planning and everything, and I ran headlong into what I had never had before, which was an anxiety attack. But I thought I was having a heart trouble. So
wow.
I 2 trips to the hospital, 1 by ambulance. And finally, the guy in the ER, same guy both times, and he finally goes, well, I can rule out your heart, but you're having an anxiety attack. And this is kind of what it looks like. And it'll give you, you can feel chest pain, you can feel all these things. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, I've worked with people who went through anxiety. I've counseled people, but for me, it was like unheard of. Like I hadn't, like, there was a period where I didn't sleep for 72 hours because I was just like having this panic, and I could not and I was like freaking out, like I'm losing it, and then in the midst of that, the guy goes, not to give you any more anxiety, but in our scan to see this, we actually found a tumor against your heart and lungs about the size of a ping pong ball. And
that's not going to create any more anxiety. That's no big deal.
He's like, so like, me, like, I don't think this might help the situation, but I need to tell you. And I was like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, you're going to have to. So that became this cancer journey that really became a vulnerable spot for me, because it just was, it's just a earth shaker, right? And for me, it was like I had that tumor, I got it removed, it ended up being benign. I thought I dodged a bullet. Then I end up with a melanoma on my leg. I have that removed. Everything looks fine. I feel great. But each time I had to go in because I had a small complication, and they'd find something else and a totally different cancer. So then they finally find lesions on my liver, and I hear the word stage 4 colorectal cancer. And I don't know what she talked for another half hour on the phone. I don't know what she said. All I heard was stage 4. And I was in an executive meeting. I walked out. I took the phone call. I called Cher, my wife, in, and I said, we're going to have to go to the doctors tomorrow. They're going to unpack some things, but bottom line is I have stage 4 colorectal cancer. And this begins this journey of just how, like, coming to grips with life and your mortality. And then you're you do like everybody, you Google everything, you're looking like, what are the percentages, well, I could live up to 4 years on average, and but not, and you're just, and while people and even you are telling yourself, oh, I'll beat the average, at the same time, you're like, you're very aware that you could possibly not, and the averages are against you. And that became a whole new world for me, because it just switched everything. Like, it just, all of a sudden I was the guy who wanted to invest in people and wanted to talk to people and do everything. And all of a sudden I was the guy who had this disease and I could die, and I didn't know how to work through it all. And how do I break the news to my daughters?
Yeah.
And it just, it became something where I just had to, how do you talk through those things and endure all those first, and then you hear words like chemo, which you understood one way before it was you, you
Yeah.
know, and then all of a sudden
Yeah.
now it's you and chemo's. And so you just, each one of those things becomes a new first, that impacts you. And
So
yeah, it blew my mind.
how do you, I mean, there's so much in there, man. Like, and there's so many layers to that. Cause like, I can't imagine what that experience would be like. Like, my wife 3.5 years ago had a stroke, and we found out later she had like a 20% chance of survival. And there was a lot of things, there's all the dynamics of that, right? Surgeries, and I remember sitting in the waiting room and that, but we didn't have time to think about it.
Mhm.
Like, that's one thing that, like, as I think about our journeys, and I was on the caregiver side, so Shara and I have probably more similar journeys than you and I
Yeah.
do. But I didn't have time to think about anything until she came home, and we were lucky that she came home within like a day and a half. And then it was like, okay, now what, right? But how do you manage the roller coaster of that? Because I know I've heard you talk about, you go in, okay, we got this tumor, it was benign. Okay, oh wait, there's something else. So you hear, okay, I'm clear, and you're like, all right, whoo, dodged a bullet, that was great. And then
Yeah.
you're like, oh wait, they're still shooting at me. Okay, no wait, okay, we got that clear. And it's like I have to think that your journey up until that point, and developing skills and humility and a curious mind and an ability to sort of recognize you don't know what you don't know, sort of set you up a little bit for that. But then also, like, the emotional roller coaster has
Mhm.
got to be just tough. So I'm curious if you've figured out how you manage to stay positive, or how you manage to work through that and be an inspiration to other people.
I think the first thing was that you go through what so many people go through, and it's not just cancer. I think it happens a lot of various ways, and it's not just within, like a church setting or a faith-based setting. It happens just with friends, and it happens all the time. And that is, you have this initial surge of people who want to help you, and you're overwhelmed, with their kindness and their goodness. They're coming over, they're talking, they're
Sure.
praying for you, and everything. And then, and I think we do I think is humanity, I think, at least in the United States, we've done a good job of that. We take care, we have a heart, we take care of people, we do meal trains, we do all this stuff. But I think all of a sudden when it comes to, what's next, like, okay, I've come over and I've said, I'm praying for you, I hope you are healed of this, or I hope it goes away, I hope it goes into remission, like all these things. And you hear it, well, pretty soon, the fifth or sixth or seventh time you have to say that to somebody, you even are starting to feel cynical or weird. And so you just kind of start to fade away, right? And I never had experienced that or heard of that until it happened. And then it was like, I had friends who talked to me, we were hanging out every single week, talking football, doing everything. And all of a sudden they're gone and
Mm.
they're silent. Some of them, like, they're, I have like really close friends. I have about four of them that haven't talked to me at all
Wow.
since. And so, you kind of are like, how do, like, we were talking all the time. We were talking 5 times a week. I'd see them almost, every day. We were co-workers, and we were close friends, and we were doing stuff together. And then I think, so that to me was one thing of, you know, and in there kind of baked into a few things. Like one is, it really is mentally tough on you to consistently hear only, you know, I pray for healing, I hope you get better, I hope this thing, you know, da 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 da. And it just is that repeat, and it's on steady repeat, right? And
Yeah.
you get it on social media, you get it on, and I think the really thing is not because you know those people love you and their hearts are in it, but it sets you up, you know, if you're a person of faith, it sets you up against God. It's like, okay, well, the only person who can solve this problem for me isn't
Yeah.
me, really the doctors, isn't chemo. It's God's got to come in with a Hail Mary pass, and he's going to come in and this is it. So if that doesn't happen, and I'm in my 21st round of chemo, and I'm headed into radiation on October 11th, which is, you know, that's what's happening for me right now in my world, then to some degree, like, who's to blame for that, right? I mean, you start to kind of,
Yeah.
you know, so it pits you up against God for one, and it really starts to attack your faith in a place where your faith is so vulnerable anyway, that it really is hard. And then now you have this combination of friends kind of pulling back away from that, and so you're just like, well, good grief, what was the last 5, 10, 15 years with you guys? Like, was that
Yeah.
real, or like, were we friends, or is this just, you know, we were,
Yeah.
you know? And so
It's
that starts to tick away at your faith. And then I think what I had to do is I had to really start to kind of think, what do I need? Like, if I were to sit down and say to someone, what do I need? Not just like, what, you know, because you could fill the world with wants. Like, I want it to go away. I want more time with my kids. Like, I want. But what do I need? And I think for me, it was like, I need to maintain hope no matter what the circumstance, that I'm always attached to hope. My hope is in God. My hope is in what my faith tells me. And so when I look at that, then if I'm experiencing a great week or something goes in remission or something, I'm still tethered to the hope. Like, hope is still there, it's prevalent, but it's not tied to my circumstance. And if I go through 40 rounds of chemo and I'm brutally sick, I still have hope. And so for me, it had to start with telling people, I want, you know, I don't ever want you to stop praying that this goes away or that I beat it, but could you pray more for hope? Like, because that's what is missing when I'm in my darkest moments, when I'm sitting on the couch and my family has gone to bed and I have pain that's keeping me up, and I'm sitting up and I'm just staring at the wall and trying to grit out, you know, like, you can't even, because
yeah.
sometimes pain is so strong, you want to tell people, like, you don't have time to contemplate death sometimes,
You're just
because the
breathing
pain is
through the
so strong.
pain.
You're just like, how do I grit my teeth long enough that I get on the other side of this terrible pain that I'm in, you know? And it becomes a game of hours and minutes, you know. And so in those dark moments where you're sitting there, the one thing that's prevalent is just this kind of darkness that pervades into your world, and you're just like, what do you want? You know, like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to be learning? And is there, like, because I'll get there can I just get there faster?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like, what is it that this is producing in me? What is this thing that I'm supposed to pull away from? And I think you know, my first thing was to realize there's just pure gratuitous evil in the world. There is, and cancer and disease is part of that evil, and it is gratuitous. It does not favor the rich or the poor or
Yeah.
it is just, it's there, right? And there's an acceptance to it that you have to come to grips with. You just got to stare it in the eyes and talk to it. So I think that was one thing. The biggest thing I had to do is also, like, personify. Like, what I had to do is I read this thing called Chasing Daylight. It was a book written by a guy who was terminal cancer, and he's not going to make it to see his daughter enter the 7th grade. So she's going to go in the 7th grade in September. He's not going to live till then, you know, if they're right on how long he has. And so he had to come to grips with it. And part of his, you know, in the book, and part of what he taught me was personification. I got to take this thing, this darkness, this disease, this evil, and I got to sit it in a chair. And I got to have a conversation with it. I have to sit there and have this conversation. And for me, with my faith, my conversation was that I also sat Jesus in a chair, and I sat there and I had Jesus having a conversation with this thing that was warring against my body, warring against all that I loved, warring against time with my family, my daughters, robbing me potentially of all these things. And just, you know, you have to listen to, you know, what that says about your life, and you have to sit through it. And it's extremely powerful, because it is really laying out your whole life in front of you on a platter, and you have to kind of look at it, because I think your thoughts in those moments often turn to the shoulda, woulda, couldas.
Yeah.
The, you know, could I get a retake? Could I get a redo? And those aren't possible. And so you have to kind of, so it's not just coming to grips with death. It's kind of coming to grips with the fact that, you know, I can't right every wrong that I've done. I can't take back every conversation. I can't take back every action. And so I have to come to terms with that. And without Jesus in my life, I don't think you could come to terms, because it's, to me, it's the source of forgiveness and grace. And you have to give it to yourself. But I think you have to understand that evil that's sitting over in that chair doesn't have power over you. It doesn't have, it cannot be the accuser. It can't sit there and condemn you and put you into shame. You know, I think one of the books that I, as a kid, I was asked to read, but then later came back to, there's this thing called Pilgrim's Progress. And of course, the guy's name is Pilgrim, or Christian, and he's on this path, but he comes across law, and law beats him down, tries to kill him. And then when he gets back up, he does it again, and he does it again. And then all of a sudden, this lamb comes in and just says, innocent. And then law goes away. And it's just like, and it's the most powerful illustration, because it's like, if you live under this law, all the law can do is point out your error. You're a lawbreaker.
Yeah.
And once you've broken the law, then that's you. Like, and so all these mistakes are just staring at you, and death just makes it more pronounced. So when death is sitting there, it's like, see, and you just, all these things come out of the woodwork, and you remember every single thing that you've done. And yet, if you insert, you know, when I insert my faith in Christ, then it's like innocent, you know, just as if I've never sinned. Like, I am pronounced.
That's super powerful. And thank you for sharing that, man. I mean, that's like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that, because I stayed away from the church for so long because of so many things I had done, and just my own fears of judgment. And I can't, I mean, I just give it to you, because I can't imagine having that mirror held up so strongly, and knowing that, like, what's done is done, sort of, right? And it's only by grace and through faith that we're able to resolve that. And Um, yeah, man, I just, I really honor you for sharing that viewpoint. And it is interesting. It's hard not to become cynical because people suck sometimes, right? Like friends that you're
Yeah,
friends with for years, and you see them and where you do the things. And I mean, it's a poor analogy, but when I got sober, I lost all my friends.
mhm,
And I remember one phone call, somebody called me and they said, "Hey, we're getting together Friday night. We haven't seen you in a couple weeks. What have you been up to? You got to come hang." And I was like, "Yeah, I quit drinking." And he was like, "Oh." And that was it. I never spoke to him again. Like,
yeah,
oh, okay. So I don't drink. You don't like, you want to grab coffee? You want to grab a burger? And I can't even imagine like in a moment of need having having people. But then I can, because when my wife had her stroke, I mean, I have three sisters, and one of them didn't even acknowledge that it's like you have people in your lives, and I think sometimes it's just they don't know how to react,
yeah,
and they let fear and they let shame get the best of them, or they feel like they didn't say anything within the first week or two, and now they're embarrassed, and they don't they're like, I don't know. But I'm so grateful you shared that, because I think it's a really powerful visual, and I'm a big fan of visualization. So like, you didn't use that word though. What was the personification?
yeah, yeah,
That's an even stronger word, man. Like I love that, because to make it a person and sit it in a chair and talk to it. And I'm sure you've cursed it out, and you've yelled at it, and you've questioned it, um and I think there's a catharsis in there too. Is that right? Like to be able to like really just tell it off.
yeah, yeah. There is, yeah, and I
Um,
think you
yeah,
you, you just and and for me, it was the only way to come. It helps you come to grips with all of it. Like I think so many times we have a distant faith of a distant God who is distant, and he's so big, that how could he take, interest in me, and even if you're not a person of faith, I think there's this idea of whether it's goodness or whatever, you look at life and you really try to make sense of it all, but you just feel like this small little sliver. I'm not a cog, even a big cog in the wheel of life. And I think, but you are like, there's this immense worth and value to who
yeah.
you are, and you matter. And I think, for me,
When you
like,
have impact, like
yeah,
regardless of where you're at in your journey, you have impact. You're
yeah,
influencing and impacting people for good or bad. You get to choose that.
yep. And I think you just personification and pulling that in helps you kind of make yourself, it's a good way for you to understand your worth and value, right? Because you're worth having this discussion, you're worth standing up for yourself, you're worth yelling and
Mm.
getting upset and expressing your what how you feel. And
Did did that process give you some confidence? And like you said, like I said to myself, I'm going to beat this. But in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, right. Like here's what the numbers are. Here's what the
yeah,
But like, so did that give you like some of that hope and some of that confidence? Being like, I am strong enough for this. I can do this. I'm going to fight for my life.
yeah, it did. I think two things. I think it reminded me of who I was already, which is a fighter. Like, I'm not just going to sit down and throw my hands in the air and give up. But it also, I think, helped me because in order to do that, you have to be okay with the results, right? The easiest thing for us to relate to probably in Colorado Springs is we have, you throw a stone in any direction and hit somebody who works at a military installation.
Yep.
But you have to come to grips with that. Bullets are flying over your head. You may finish your deployment and come back and then separate from the military and have a long life, and you may not, right?
Yeah.
And that's a reality that you have to come to terms with, and it's a reality you have to face. And I think that's the same thing for me, is it helped me understand I can't, this entity sitting across from me in this chair is unavoidable.
Yep.
We're going to have a date where we meet.
Yep.
I don't get to determine how long that's going to be. And so, but it's inevitable. So I have to come to terms with it. And then I'm going to choose to fight anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to choose to fight instead of throwing my hands in the air and just like giving up. I'm going to do it. So then it becomes, well, what is the purpose behind, my fight? It can't just be self-preservation.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so I think it was like how many more people can I touch? What about all the other cancer fighters who are going through things, that don't have a group, don't have friends, that maybe they didn't have any friends to begin with? I have a ton of friends. A few didn't talk to me.
Yeah, there's two things in that. One is, I talk a lot about in the coaching and the mentoring I do, that we don't control results. It doesn't matter how hard we try. The results are there's too many other factors at play. All we control is how we show up, what we do. Like, and I've had numerous people share stories with me. Recently, I had a doctor I was speaking with. Two patients came in, same diagnosis, same kind of problem. One of them that day was like, I'm going to beat it. I got it. Tell me what I got to do. She did the work. She's fine. The other one lived in fear. All she worried about was the results. And 6 months later, he was at her funeral. And it was just like how important that mindset is, that like you said, I have no control over the result. I know I'm going to meet this someday.
Yeah.
You have no control over when, you have no control over how, you have no control over the result. But man, from the time you wake up to the time you fall asleep, that's all you have is the ability to decide what you're going to do. And like recognizing that you're, with the breath that you still have, you can have a positive impact. And there's so many people, like, and I think that's just baked into who you are, right? Like you said, some guys get up and go to work every day and come home and do their thing, and they're okay with that. But like, you've never been that guy. Like,
Right. And that even, I think that's the other thing that shifts is all this is, talk about humility, but you're used to being the guy who just like works hard and 50, 60 hours, who cares? Like, I didn't keep track how many hours I worked. I didn't care. Like, the job is to do the job, and whatever
it becomes your lifestyle. When you love what you're doing, it just becomes your lifestyle anyway.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden you take this shift and you're like, well, because I think the other thing, the listeners can understand is that, and this isn't true just of me. So, I mean, I don't want anyone to ever feel sorry for me. This happens to hundreds and hundreds of people with disease and tons of people with cancer, is that sometimes, our places of employment, our places of work, decide for us that we can't do the job. And so that kind of hit, that's what happened to me. And so in the midst of my 6th round, like the day before my 6th round, I'm let go from my position. And so all of a sudden, like, what is my purpose? And we talked about, sometimes your identity is, more, and I'm like, well, so then you have to shift this whole thing of like, well, what am I accomplishing? What am I working towards? What is my goal each day? I probably drove Shara crazy, because I'm just like, but at the same time, what I realized is the further I got into rounds, I was like having to take naps in the afternoon, and I was having to lay low, and then I had COVID, and then it's like you start to all of a sudden see the disease, like you're still fighting, but it's getting some victories over you a little bit, and it's hitting you, and you have to come to grips with the fact that I can't put 50 hours into something. I can't get X done. I have to rely on someone else, or I have to give up that aspiration. And that's the other hard part, is just, while you're in the midst of fighting, you have to accept the fact that you're in a fight for your life. I mean, so it's going to take its toll.
Yeah. It's got to make you wonder too about like legacy, and like it kind of makes me think of two things. And I want to just kind of ask you, like it seems as if, like, with raising your daughters, and I don't remember. I think you have two that are still home, or is it three that are still home?
Yeah, two are staying with us right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you still have two kids at home who are in it. They're seeing it every day. So it has to
Mhm.
make you think of your legacy. And then the other thing is like I just can't get over the idea of like how just unfair it is. Like and how you kind of reconcile that, because like you said, like um it's gratuitous, man. Like there's no, like you mentioned COVID, right? Like with COVID, it's like, well, I was in a group, I didn't wear a mask, I didn't, whatever, right? Like not to go down a political road, but like most people with something that's infectious or viral, they can go, well, I did this thing, and so I got to fix it, and that was on me. But like this is just like luck
Yeah.
of the draw. Like what's the?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, the hard thing is, like, I had a buddy that was diagnosed with a different form of cancer probably about 2 months after I was, and asked me for advice on chemo and everything, and got whiplash by chemo, like really had like way worse. I had it bad the first few rounds, but he made it look like a walk in the park. But then shortly after he went through this aggressive chemo, it's gone. He just ran a 5K, and I'm just sitting there like, there's those moments too where on one hand you're like, yeah, like, yeah,
Yeah,
when you're thinking of him, and then when you turn towards yourself though at night, you're just like, so when's that gonna happen? When am I,
yeah,
walking to the other side of this? And then again, you have to remind yourself, well, who knows? It might not happen. Like, just, you have to be okay with that, right? And
yeah,
that's the thing. And it's so random, right? You look at people who you thought were one, just one thing. I just had a really close friend who lost a friend who's like the same age as us. I'm 50, and
okay,
his friend, good health, everything, and got COVID and died.
yeah,
And we're like, like, has three kids at home, a wife, and you're just like
yeah.
sitting,
It
wow.
seems arbitrary, man. I mean, the same week that I had COVID, a good buddy of mine's brother got it, and he had it too. And me, my wife, and I mean, he lives in a different state. He lives up in Washington, and we were all kind of communicating through the whole thing. And then next thing you know, his brother's in ICU, and 72 hours later, he's gone.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the, like, I don't.
Yeah.
It seems so. It really does make you face your own mortality. And for me, like the thing that happened for me, and it's easy for me to say this, so I was worried about being offensive or saying the wrong thing, but like when my wife came out of her surgery and she came home and we started having some conversations about what the future looked like, um, she expressed a lot of fear, and it was just a really dark time for her.
Hmm.
And the only thing I could do was like just was like, but you're here. So like whether it's one day, a week, 6 months, let's live it out
Yeah.
regardless, because man, we almost didn't have this day. So like
Yeah.
let's not, and it's easy for me to say because I didn't face death. And she was kind of like, yeah, it's easy for you, man. Like you were like they weren't playing in your brain with a catheter. Um, but do you and I feel like the reason I'm drawn to you and I really want to talk to you about this because you seem to, through your Facebook group and through your nonprofit that I want to touch on a little bit, for people who are like, man, how do I get this mindset? How do I work towards this? How do I get into this community? Like you seem to really embrace that, like you're coming for me, but I'm gonna live it out until that day.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, it really becomes this. The one thing you control is you can control your mindset regardless of what every day brings, right? You learn very quickly, I can't control how I feel each day, because that's random, and some days are great, some days aren't,
Yeah,
and everything else you can't control. So you have to look at life and really try to focus in um, on trying to be just like, I'm going to accomplish this in my attitude and in the walk every single day that I approach that. I think, you have to kind of get that daily mindset of less being driven by necessarily how you feel, but more of like, what is the bigger purpose? Like, the time I do have left, what am I gonna have to show for it? And I think that's the big thing.
Yeah. And so is that part of the reason why you launched Stages?
It is like, it really hit me. I think I got to talk to so many different people about just, what all these cancer fighters and what they were facing. And I thought my story was unique. And then as I started talking to all these people in, infusion and all this stuff and having conversations, I was just taken back by how similar we all had different experiences. And so I felt like, well, there's a lot of things to add here. One is to help people walk through all the first, because one of the biggest things for Stages, the nonprofit, is just trying to help people cope with the first. Like, you talked about, like, everything's coming at you warp speed, and you can only focus in on so many things. But if you don't focus, you miss things. Like, I didn't pay attention to the idea of neuropathy.
Okay.
So like, when I was going through chemo, that was like that's an easy example where somewhere in the literature, and when they went over it with me, they said, hey, this drug can cause neuropathy, and if you don't tell us about it right away, it could lead to permanent nerve damage. Well, somewhere that passed me. Like, in the big scheme of things, I didn't listen to that little lecture.
That one of 700 things.
Yeah. And I didn't read the brochure and everything. And what ended up happening was, you get that mindset of like, I don't want to show weakness. How are you doing with chemo? Your doctor's asking, how you feeling? How you doing? And you're like, I got this. Let's do it.
Good.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's get it.
Yeah. Bring it on.
But of course, I wasn't saying like, oh, like, this numb thing comes and then it goes, but every time it kind of lasts a little longer. So then finally I was like, Doc, I'm in like 4 weeks and I can't feel my feet or my hands. And she's like, oh, crap. So then we have to stop that drug. And I'm like, why? I mean, it's being successful. My cancer's responding to it. Why would I stop? And of course, the answer was because it can create permanent nerve damage, and you may never get feeling back in your hands and your feet completely ever. And I'm like, what? So I think first, like, and that's just one example, but I think there's a lot of things that come at cancer fighters, and being able to help walk them through those first. What is chemo like? What is an infusion ward like? Oh, I have this private room that I get to sit with my wife, and we get to.
That was one thing that kind of blew me away. Like, I'm a pretty introverted person, and I think you love people, but like, my experience with you is that you're sort of you're not like, running up to people and saying hi and introducing yourself and that sort of thing. And I was kind of surprised to hear that, like, when you go in for your infusions, like, it's like a board meeting, man. There's like 20, 30, 40 people in the room sometimes. Yeah. Like, you're not like in this vulnerable space by yourself where you get to process. I got to imagine that's got to be uncomfortable as like somebody's in there losing their shit, crying and like really struggling, and then you're like, I got this, I'm good. Somebody else is like just confused. Like, man, that picture like in my head was just not a great scenario.
Well, it's totally different. I mean, like, you hear these words chemo and, oh, my friend, my mom, my uncle, some prayer request, and you have this vision, and you vision more of what that's like. Oh, there's an IV, there's this, and then you get there and you're like, no, there's all these chairs that are in a row, and we're stacked about maybe 6 to 8 feet apart, and and then what you're also awakened to is that sometimes I think we think cancer is more, like, the majority are old people. And I'm sitting there looking at people who are like 15, 20 years younger than me who are there. I'm looking at a lady who has more rounds under her belt and she's 82 and she's smiling and joking. So I'm just like, well, I can't complain.
Yeah.
Like,
You start playing the compare game, right? You're like, well,
yeah,
shit,
so
man, she's 80
you're looking at
something and
her, yeah, I'm like,
50
well, I
rounds
can't.
in. I can't cry. I can't be.
So you just, I think it was, and that's kind of a new session. And then the other thing is, a lot of people don't realize, because of COVID and stuff, they think, well, I can't bring someone, but I I've always been able, from day one all the way through, even through COVID, able to have somebody sit in there with you. And it's important, even if they bring their headphones and they bring a book or something and you don't talk the entire time. It's just a presence that is there that you feel
Interesting.
so supported, right? And it's really important, and it makes all the difference. And I've been in infusion by myself, and I've been with someone, and by yourself you can get in your head, and thoughts
Yeah.
can creep in. And so it's always good to have support there. So stage is really, on one hand, trying to help people kind of walk through, like, all these, how do you talk to your wife, how do you, communication changes when you start, the caregiver is a different walk, right? And it's a hard walk, as much as I might be thinking of, and I know your wife was thinking of, well, I could die and I don't know, and all these things. On the other side, you're like, yeah, you could die, and I have to think about what that's like when you're gone. Like, how am I going to take care of the kids? What that's going to look like? How, and so those things are there. So there's always this balance of realizing the caregivers are just in as hard of a spot, if not worse, and there's sometimes the least supported, like there's, and I think so. That's one of the big things with stages, when we did the podcast and everything, I share on there, because I want a voice that speaks for the caregiver, because there's a lot, they're in the fight with you, but they're also kind of in their own mental fight, and it's completely different.
Yeah, it is. I was real lucky when we were going through Carrie, and you're right. Like, we had tons of people show up the first week, and then it was kind of like, once she got home, and like, she was pretty well out of the woods, with the big stuff. It was like everybody's lives went back to normal, but ours. And and you kind of struggle with, like, well, do they care? Do they not care? And then it's like, look, man, we all got our own journeys to walk. Like, and then the flip side was, like, we had more food than we knew what to do. And I was like, all right, look, nobody bring me food anymore. I'm already feeding as many people as I can on my street. But I was real lucky in that I had a couple of people who had been through similar situations, who really didn't check in on my wife, but checked in on me more than her, because they were like, she's covered. Like, but are you being, and just having, like, friends that would come over and stay with her so I could go catch a movie, or just get out of the house, stuff like that. And it's a much different. So Stages is a nonprofit that you started. It's Facebook group, website. People can go there, they can learn about your journey, learn from you what you're experiencing, they can seek support. Are you guys doing any kind of grants or any kind? I know you're raising money for some stuff, but
we're raising a lot of money. The biggest thing we want to do is kind of get out of the publication on the first, and kind of, when you get diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis, here's some things that we just want to help you walk through, like, that you probably will be surprised by, right? And I think just like, so that you can walk people through. And we're doing one for the cancer fighter, but also one for the because there's a lot of firsts for a caregiver as well. And so I think, to expect, that this happens. And even talking about the friend stuff, like, there's just people who are just going to feel awkward, and they're going to fall off, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean they don't love you. It just, it is what it is, and it's going to happen. So, the more you can prepare for it. Yep.
What brought you to a place where you wanted to start your own thing instead of aligning with, because I mean, like, cancer's not new. I mean, there's hundreds of organizations out there. So did you just feel like there wasn't one that filled that void, or
I felt like there was a lot of things that were either, it was a lot of general information, or it was very specific to a type of of cancer, but wasn't like a great place to tie it all in with like a message of hope. And then I think also the thing is, you have the job reality, I think, is another thing that, how do we as employers, and leaders, how do we do a better an ethical job of handling
Yeah.
the subject of cancer. We've done a good
Yeah.
job, maternity leave, and we, and different things like that we've addressed that, probably you and I, when we first started out, there wasn't, maternity leave
Yeah.
was unheard of. And now it's there. But there's a lot of times where we look at, somebody, has cancer, and the very first thing, well, how do you think that's going to affect the first question I was asked was, how do you think that's going to affect your job?
Or your
And
ability to do your job.
yeah, and you're just kind of like, I don't know. I was just told, like, I've never
Right.
done cancer before.
Right.
One of those things like, geez, I don't know. And I was pretty upset. But then as I started talking to all these fighters, I realized they were asked the same thing. And so when you have to, I think we can start to, stages can be a place too that informs and helps the workplace, I think, do a better job of saying like, hey, what they need in the beginning. Like, the oncologist couldn't answer the question you just asked.
Yeah.
Everybody's journey is different with cancer, and so there, 100 different people are going to have 100 different journeys. What we will know is we'll kind of have a better answer to what that's going to look like 3 to 4 to 5 rounds in. So could you just be highly flexible and see how that is? If they can work, they'll work. If they need some time off, they're going to need. But could you just create a spirit of flexibility in the beginning, and then let's see what this long-term, response is. How's the body responding to chemo? How's the cancer responding to chemo? Then we can start asking bigger questions. But when you're talking to somebody who's been, I talked to a guy who was like, like a 28, 30-year career, leader, everything, won an award like for his job, and then all of a sudden he's asked to make a decision, the week he was diagnosed, like, how do you think? And it's like, so you have to make a career decision. And what happens is, the reason why stages is so important and different than the other groups out there is stages kind of, can come in and hit the pause button, because I think sometimes what ends up happening with that gentleman, what he did is he just assumed they must be right. I guess you're right. I probably won't be able to do my job.
Right.
So
which just adds such a layer of fear, man. It's just such a, like, it starts making everything really final. Like, I've lost my career. Yeah.
He's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna, I'll have to do something and figure out paperwork for disability. I mean, he'd already phoned it in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what happens if you beat this and you live for another 25, 30 years?
Yeah.
Oh, and it like doesn't dawn on him, and it's like, and I'm like, yeah, so like, don't jump to a conclusion, because a lot of people are projecting stuff on you, I think.
Yeah.
So I think stages is really to kind of get you to not rush into things, to get you to think like, hey, you're going to be asked this question, get prepared for it, and here's kind of what you could do to work with your employer and start the conversation and be proactive and advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea, because, like, I mean, I've been an employer, and, so I understand the employer mindset of like, I got a business to protect. Especially if like you're in a large corporation where there's stockholders, maybe there's, whatever. There's always somebody looking at the profit line, right? Looking at the bottom line. So I understand the priority behind that. And it kind of circles back to like the proximity of seeing them as people and not employees. And like, how is your wife? And I just can't imagine being diagnosed or being an employer and not going, hey, take a week off to process this, man. Like, we'll figure out the rest later. It's like, I really like the idea of like a spirit of flexibility, and I almost feel like it's like, and a spirit of grace. Like, this person's just been given probably some of the hardest news they're going to have to deal with, and you can't be like, so we be here Tuesday at 6. Like,
yeah, exactly. And
I don't know.
Yeah. And then like, are you like, if you work, like for me, like if you at work on average 40 to 50 hours a week, oh, do you think you can, you're basically asking me, can I continue that pace, post chemo? or during chemo, and you're like, you know, and my answer, the real answer is, because I did 6 rounds while I was still working. For me, it was, yeah, I can still put in the time. I just had to change my schedule,
Yeah.
because when I was in infusion and stuff like that, I had to take some time off, but then I just made up for it on other days, and
Right.
did what I could remotely at home when I needed to.
Yeah. It
And
also
so,
kind of raises the question of like, what's our responsibility to our fellow human? Because it's like, I'm thinking like in your job, like, yeah, you can still do it. It's mostly brain, mostly mental,
uh-huh,
leadership, logistics, coordinating. Like if I'm a construction worker
yeah,
and,
I mean,
and
that's a
like,
totally different. Yep.
like I don't have the physical capability, but I still have my mind.
Mhm.
So do I have a responsibility to like move you into the front office or put you into sales or put you in something versus like, well, you can't do X, so we're out. And like, how do you balance it? I mean, yeah, it's just such a tricky thing, man. So
Yeah. And
I'm
and it's so, the answer might be that you have to eventually taper off and do something. I think any job, is going to depend on what are the requirements of the job. But even in the beginning, your off week of chemo, you might be able to log 4 or 5 days, knowing that eventually that's not going to work out for the employer. That's okay. We can have that conversation and say, we need somebody that's a full 40 every week because we're a skeleton crew and we got to have a production. But then, but can we taper this,
Yeah, can
the
we do it
slower?
humanely? Can we have some grace and can we work our way towards, and maybe I like the idea of hitting the pause button, right? Because it gives us time to really like get creative, think of some solutions. And for me, it just goes back to like how much of the world is gray, right? Like it's just we've gotten into this place where everything's like, well, you can't do X, so you're gone. And it's like, well, wait a minute, I can't do X, but I could do A, B, and C for maybe it's less money, or because I got to imagine, like we haven't even talked about, I mean, we could be here all night, right? But like then there's the whole dynamics of like this stuff ain't cheap, and insurance companies and all those layers, and the bureaucrats within the hospital system that are just actuators crunching numbers, and you
Yep.
know how many rounds do we do before we go, well, the odds are, you
Yeah.
know. So
It's
yeah, I mean, I can imagine that you guys have got your hands full putting this thing together, and I love, and part of the reason why I wanted to have you on was really like, man, if you're listening to this and you're hitting a wall on something, or you've got this what seems like an insurmountable challenge in your life, whether it's a medical diagnosis or a career change or family drama or whatever that looks like the ability to really sit down, think it through, find the lessons in it, and ask yourself, how can I learn from this? And how can I teach others? Like one of my favorite sayings is your mess with age becomes your message, right? And age doesn't have to be 20 years down the road. Like your mess with just a few months, you were like, we got to do something about this. We got to figure out how to educate people. And while I'm still here, I can do something about it. Right. And I
yeah.
think that's just, there's so much hope in that. There's so much, that's such an empowering mindset that you can have regardless of how you feel physically.
Yeah. And and that's the big thing, is also trying to help those people who may feel silent. Maybe you aren't in that situation, but you have a friend who's going through something and you're like, yeah, I went dark, or I don't know what to say, and like we spend a lot of time on the blog at Stages talking about, like, and rather than talk about the negative side of it, of people that, I talk about the simple things that people have done, like we have people who just decided, okay, we're going to get together every Sunday evening at 5 and just do dinner together, period. That's, that started. And, was that hard? No. Sometimes we go out, sometimes we go to someone's house, sometimes it's just dessert, it's not a meal. It doesn't matter, but the important thing is that it's presence, and it didn't really cost anyone much of anything, but at the end of the day, it means the whole world. And I think trying to give more and more examples of ways that you can kind of come alongside somebody who's going through something that gives you presence, and gives you that, you don't have to solve their problem. they can't. You don't have to cure cancer. Like, it's not on you. It's not like, if I just craft the perfect prayer to God, then everything's gonna, all the cancer's gonna go. It's not on you, it's not on them. They would just like you to do, like, how did your relationship look before? And let's just keep it looking the same, right? It was good before, let's keep it good. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is be a message too for the people, because so many people, what we don't want is a cancer fighter and a caregiver to ever feel like they're alone. Like, like, I've made this promise, good on this promise several times. If somebody fights cancer as a caregiver and they contact me, they literally can contact me anytime, day or night. I will answer, unless I'm helping somebody else or I just happen to be away from the phone. But I will answer the call. And what we want to do is get that to grow over time, so that in cities and stuff like that, we have a group of people who are saying, like, I want to help people through that I can be there, I could be somebody, because it's important. I think those are the serve groups and stuff that we need to start creating, is somebody who just, we're going to be there and be present and make sure that nobody feels alone. When all the dust settled on that, after the first 30 days, there's still a check-in, there's still a going over, there's still interest and care. So yeah,
I love it, man. I'm so grateful that our paths crossed, and that you were willing to share what you're going through and what you've experienced here. And I think what you're doing is, I don't know if it's the best way to handle it, but man, it's a good way to take what you got and make the best of it. So super grateful for you, man. Is there anything you want to share before we wrap? I mean, I could sit here. I got a bazillion questions, but
I just, thanks for having me. I think a podcast like yours that really helps, I think, encourage people that there's a level of fight that we all have to have, and that life throws us a lot of different things. And I think the more that we can strive towards humility and vulnerability, and that we can be real with people and talk about stuff, I'm not ashamed to be emotional, because it matters, right? And I don't need to hide it. And I think that's important for people to hear and see, I think. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Let's do it again when the time is right.
All
And
right.
in the meantime, guys, go check out Stages. I'll put links to all the stuff in the show description. And hopefully, if you guys need a resource for this particular situation, you guys go check it out.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, man.
Cool, man.